the IDP show, now you know.
A huge welcome to the Week 17 rankings episode of the IDP show. I'm your host, Jase Abbey, and I'm delighted to welcome back onto the show Mr. Jon Macri, PFF Fantasy Analyst and co-host of the PFF Fantasy Pod. Jon, a slightly belated Merry Christmas to you, my friend. How are things?
Absolutely. Yeah, everything's been good. Merry Christmas to you as well. And yeah, it feels like we haven't talked in so long, Jace. It's no, for those that don't know. Yeah, we're recording back-to-back shows, man. This is fun. It's always fun talking IDP and football with you and just talking with you in general. So I'm very happy and honored that you chose me for championship week here. And then that's the main thing. We got I got several championship matches myself and need all the insight and knowledge that you got for me to help me set those lineups, and hopefully we can do the same for everybody else as well.
Oh, absolutely. And for that reason, it being championship week, our advice has got to be on point this week, hasn't it? So, but we always are. It always is. We're never wrong about anything, right? So it's just business as usual.
100% accuracy. Yeah. That's what we're
So, as usual, we're going to go position by position, discussing some of the guys we like or dislike for Week 17. So, Jon, let's jump straight into this, and let's go over the linebacker position first. Who is your featured linebacker like in Week 17?
Yeah, so I think I had a hard time picking who I wanted to feature here, but I figured I may as well start with my featured, like the guy that I have is LB1 this week. And then maybe it's controversial over the past few weeks where his production has been a little bit lower than what we were seeing earlier in the year, but it's CJ Mosley of the New York Jets. So playing on Thursday night now against the Cleveland Browns. He's had an above average tackle efficiency all season long, but he hasn't had more than 7 tackles since week 12 now, right? So people probably a little bit frustrated, a little bit down on CJ Mosley, but he's also had 7 games this season of double-digit or more tackles in a game, which is a really strong number here for a linebacker. The Cleveland Browns are giving up the most tackles per game to the linebacker position as well. So as ideal of a matchup as you can hope for a full-time linebacker, CJ Mosley, I understand that the ebbs and flows of a season, we all got to understand that. And this is definitely a week for him to bounce back. I know his tackle prop is at 7.5 right now as well on DraftKings. So somebody that I love this week, and somebody that I'm betting on a big bounce back, which is a little bit of the theme of some of my picks here as well, is bounce back guys, and CJ Mosley definitely the top of the list for me.
Yeah. One of the great things about having you on this show, Jon, is that you're very thorough with your analysis. One of the downsides is that you steal all of the good points and leave me with very little to say. So I'm right there with you. It's been a barren spell, but if he's going to bounce back, this is going to be the week for him to do it, isn't it? The matchups don't get any better than this, and I love that prop that you mentioned, especially when combined with the Quincy Williams one that you mentioned on your show. Is that set at like something like 4.5 tackles?
4.5 solos for Quincy Williams, and yeah, 7.5 total for CJ Mosley is the number. Like, I try not to bet too like the over on totals for both linebackers, because there's bound to be some disappointment there. But for solos, I'm fine to kind of split it up or go to assists if you want. This is just a nice matchup for linebackers. So like it for Mosley and for Quincy Williams on Thursday.
Nice. Yeah, I've got him as my LB7 this week. I wanted to have him slightly higher. It's the matchup for him to bounce back and deliver when we need him most.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? And then look, LB1, LB7, LB12, inside, you're starting him, right? That's really the main thing. And then it doesn't really matter whether they're ranked 1, 2, 3, or 7 or whatever. So yeah, I'm with you, man. It's a nice matchup. I like CJ Mosley.
Absolutely. So my guy is less flashy than CJ Mosley, and I've gone with Robert Spillane as my featured linebacker for Week 17. He's my LB17, 5 places up from last week. As I said, he's not flashy, but we care more about production than we do picking the sexier names. And Spillane is, I feel, a fairly reliable producer. 121 combined tackles this year, slightly below average, 12.3% tackle efficiency rate, at least 9 tackles in his last 5 games, and enough big plays to give him a reasonable ceiling most weeks as well. I've singled him out this week, though, because of his matchup with the Colts. They've allowed the 5th most tackles to opposition linebackers, and I feel like Big Bob could come close to, or maybe even surpass, double-digit tackles this week, and do his bit towards helping his fantasy managers over the line in that championship game. Where's your head at on Spillane, John?
Yeah, very similar. I have on that kind of fringe, like LB2, LB3 range. And like you said, more the tackle efficiency hasn't quite been there for him this season, but still he's been really solid. 130 tackles on the season is nothing to sneeze at, right? So that's a really nice number for him. 3.5 sacks in there as well. And like you said, he's coming up with the big plays. It's a great matchup against the Colts, who are giving up the 5th most tackles per game to the linebacker position. So a lot to love there for Spillane as the lone every down linebacker in Las Vegas as well. So it's nice.
Yeah. So hit me up with any other linebackers you want to plug this week, John.
Yeah, so just a few, like you said, quick hitters kind of thing. And again, kind of maybe sticking a little bit to the bounce back theme here for the first guy, at least, is TJ Edwards. I've just loved him all season long. He hasn't had double-digit tackles since week 10 of the season, but he's had interceptions in there. He's got a half sack in there, some tackles for loss as well. Again, one of the more efficient tacklers at the linebacker position, 14.5%. Going against a run-heavy team in Atlanta, which always yields more tackle efficiency as well, and that's why the Falcons are giving up the 6th most tackles per game to the linebacker position. So TJ Edwards, if you've been down on him recently, he's LB5 for me this week. I expect a nice bounce back there. I also really like Frankie Luvu of the Carolina Panthers. He's coming off a really nice game and really back-to-back games of 10 total tackles exactly, and now gets a nice matchup going against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who give up the 2nd most tackles per game to the linebacker position. He's been about average as far as tackle efficiency goes, but another one of those guys very similar to Robert Spillane, where he's been able to land those big plays, and 5.5 sacks on the year is a really nice number, just a half sack behind Brian Burns for the team lead. So Frankie Luvu, one of those guys that can do it all, and I like him for his big play upside this week. And then after that, I went a little bit deeper for the last guy, which is David Long of the Miami Dolphins. So the past 3 weeks, he's played 89%, 93%, 92% of the defensive snaps. So solid numbers there as far as playing time goes, and at least feel like we can trust him in lineups. More for deeper leagues, because the Miami linebackers as a whole just been an inefficient group as far as tackle efficiency goes. And I know Duke Riley playing slightly more, but he just hasn't been efficient, below 10% tackle efficiency this season, and facing the Ravens too, who've given up the 3rd most tackles per game to the linebacker position. So David Long, he's had his up and down weeks, more down than up, obviously, but LB42 for me this week. So really the deep leagues that I'm looking at, as like an LB4, it's not an every down role exactly either. So just a little bit lower in that sense, but I do like him in deeper leagues quite a bit.
Good stuff. Yeah, I've got Luvu as well as one of my other quick mentions that I like at the linebacker spot. For all the reasons you mentioned, there's nothing left to add. Thank you again for stealing all the good points. He's, the tackle efficiency, it's probably a good thing that he's managed to maintain a pretty average tackle efficiency, given that he rushes the passer a little more than most off-ball linebackers do. So I see that as a plus, because he's got that sack upside as well as the tackle numbers too. The other guy I wanted to talk about was Nick Bolton. I know that the shine has come off of him a little bit this year. He's missed a lot of time. He's not been fully healthy for the vast majority of the year, but his role was slightly bigger last week than it was the week before. He's the unquestioned number 1 linebacker for the Chiefs, I was a little unsure as to whether that might happen after what Tranquil did in Bolton's absence, but yeah, it's been nice to see him and reassuring to see him earning 85-90% of the snaps for the last 2 weeks. The Bengals have been a pretty average matchup for opposition linebackers, but the offense has been slightly friendlier for opposition linebackers under Jake Browning than it was Joe Burrow. So that's where I stand. So, John, who is your featured linebacker fade? Who are you not so keen on this week?
Yeah, so for anybody that has been paying attention to the Pittsburgh Steelers linebacker core, obviously there's been a parade of injuries at the position. They just recently lost a Landon Roberts this past week, who had been the most efficient tackler in the league at like 17%, before obviously he's now likely going to be out here. And Myles Jack played 100% of the snaps when Landon Roberts went out last week. The only thing is, I don't trust Myles Jack, and the team also brought in like Blake Martinez and Jalen Smith, and they also really like a rotation over there in among their linebacker core. It's also not a great matchup going against the Seattle Seahawks, who have yielded the fewest tackles per game to the linebacker position this season. Myles Jack is a complete fade for me. I understand, going to the waiver wire and trying to add somebody that is going to be the next man up in the rotation, but I'm not a complete believer that it's going to be a 100% snap role this week. I don't think it's necessarily going to be Blake Martinez or Jalen Smith either. I think it'll be Myles Jack that leads the way in total snaps, but not the player to trust in the championship week and in a poor matchup. And yeah, just so many question marks here that Myles Jack is somebody that I'll be fading for sure.
And that's the thing, right? So it's been messy all year through injuries or because of injuries for the most part. But yeah, it could very easily continue to be messy into week 17 and week 18. So yeah, why would we go with that when we've got other options? So yeah, there's a lot of linebackers available right now. Yes, there's been a lot of injuries at the position, but some of these other backup guys have stepped up and have assumed bigger roles. There are more reliable options than the Myles Jacks of the world. So I'm right there with you. I've got to mention Ivan Pace Jr. here. Fairly obvious one, but he deserves a mention because it's Ivan Pace Jr. And I feel bad doing this, especially while I'm on the show with the original Pace devotee. But Jordan Hicks is back in the fold and has immediately taken back that full-time role in Minnesota, that sole full-time role in Minnesota, leaving Pace kind of fighting for scraps. 38% snap share last week. That's not going to get it done. It doesn't matter how efficient a player is. He's not going to be able to produce anywhere near to the level that he did when he was the sole every down linebacker in Minnesota before Hicks came back. So yeah, we're parking Pace for this year. We're hopeful about next year. We're content that he's gained some really valuable experience and has shown enough to be able to hold down that every down role when Hicks' contract expires. Yeah, just don't start him this week.
Yeah, I can't do it. It's a bummer, right? And I was, I don't mind Jordan Hicks as a player either, but I really wanted Ivan Pace to finish the season for us, for IDP purposes, especially like you said, just being so high on him at draft time and thinking that he should have been drafted. And really, I thought the third round was a perfect spot for him, but goes undrafted. And yeah, I think he's proven the NFL wrong as far as, playing ability goes here in the league. And he's been awesome. And just hope, maybe for next season, but definitely not this season, and definitely not somebody that you trust, even really in deeper leagues this week.
No. I will, though, John, forever associate Ivan Pace with you now.
Nice.
You,
Awesome.
I know the whole IDP community has come around to Ivan
Sure.
Pace, and everyone loves this guy. But you were, I think, the first person I heard mention him as a player that could do what he's gone on to do. So, yeah, very excited about next year. Any other linebackers who have slipped in your rankings this week?
Yeah, I guess so. Devin White is another guy I think worth mentioning. I know he had a nice game last week and he returned to a full-time role, and I think he was our highest graded linebacker in week 16 somehow, and that sometimes comes down to big plays, right? We'll definitely swing that in one direction or the other. I think it was Josh just shared that in our group chat that we had him as the highest graded linebacker, which is not the norm for Devin White, for anybody that's been following his career and his PFF grades. But for IDP purposes, continues to be incredibly inefficient as a tackler. He had a 7.9% tackle efficiency in week 16, so really boosted by those big plays. He's at 9% tackle efficiency for the year. And yeah, don't love the matchup this week for him either, going against the Saints. It's not a bad matchup. The Saints giving up the 11th most tackles per game to the linebacker position is typically a good thing, but when it comes to really inefficient linebackers like Devin White, that's where I start to get a little bit worried, and I push him down the rankings as well, and not somebody that I'll be trusting in championship week.
I actually wrote him up as a player that people should be looking to buy in an article earlier in the week, because I think the market is so down on him. He's obviously going to leave the team and go to another team, and I was kind of hoping for a Devondre Campbell style like improvement in his play on another team, but that's I'm really reaching. I know it.
You never know. You just never know, right? Like he was what, a 5th overall pick a few years ago, right? Like, so the NFL loves these guys. They love the reclamation projects, these former first round picks, and Devin White he's definitely going to land somewhere, right? I don't think it's going to be Tampa Bay. I think that ship has sailed. That pirate ship has sailed. That and yeah, I think there's definitely a good chance that somebody signs him as a starter, and you never know. He could very well turn things around. There's not really been too many signs of it, but like you said, the market is very low on him right now, so the price might be right to take a swing and take a gamble on somebody like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, I interrupted you. Who else did you have?
No, all good. Not too many more. The Dallas linebackers as a whole, I'm concerned about. I did not like the usage last week. 66% of the defensive snaps for Damone Clark, 48% of the snaps for Markquese Bell. Markquese Bell, incredibly efficient last week with, I think he had 9 tackles or something like that. I'm not trusting it this week. I know it's a decent matchup, very similar to Devin White's, where the Lions are giving up the 12th most tackles per game to the linebacker position. But there's always this risk with the Dallas linebackers where they can play this incredibly low snap share. They also play in a very man-heavy defense where tackle efficiency becomes a little bit harder to come by. And it's too risky for me. I know Markquese Bell, if he's in a safety role or a safety designation for IDP leagues, he becomes a bit more interesting or for lineups, and you could definitely make a case for him, but it's not one for me that I want to mess with in week 17. Yeah. And then the last one on the list that I had was so this last one, I don't know if I wanted to put this as a fade or actually a like. I was kind of on the fence of both, because in some sense I like it, and in another sense I don't. But it's Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah of the Cleveland Browns, because I have him as LB 37, which is typically higher than where I would usually put him. And he's played really well recently as far as like production goes and coming up with interceptions and sacks. But it's, again, very similar to the Dallas situation where it's fluctuating playing time with these guys, where we had seen him averaging 90% of the defensive snaps for 4 straight weeks, drop down to 72% of snaps this past week. I would not be surprised to see it around that same 70% range again this week, and not be in the 90% range. But at the same time, there's definitely a shot that it could be in the 90% range, and that he leads the group in snaps again, and could be productive. But going against the Jets, which aren't a great matchup for linebackers either, despite what Khaliki Hansen and Cody Barton did last week, where they put up like a combined 30 tackles between the two of them. And then even David Mayo, that was like a complete anomaly, that match against the Jets last week. So I don't know that the Browns are necessarily the team to do that. Also another one of those man-heavy teams, the most man-heavy team in the NFL. So a little bit of concern for the tackle efficiency and production opportunities for JOK this week.
Yeah, I'm there with you with the concerns on JOK. I don't get why he played such a small role, especially with Anthony Walker still out. His performances have, I think, deserves a bigger role. It concerns me a little bit, and this is the week not to take gambles, but he has been super productive. So I think those people that have started him will continue to start him, and I wouldn't be surprised if he still did well. I have 2 of your other guys amongst my dislikes as well. The Cowboys linebacker situation, Clark and Bell. I love how Bell has played this year. I think he's been a revelation, and I think he deserves a shot at being the sole every down guy, but that's just not what the Cowboys seem to want to do. And last week they moved away from that in a bigger way than they have at any other point that I can recall, certainly this season. So, there were other beneficiaries of that. Some of the safeties, Donovan Wilson especially, we talked about that on your show. As far as what it means for Clark and Bell, I'm out on both. I don't want to start either of those guys. Even in the deepest of leagues that start, I got that one league that starts 4 linebackers. I can find better players. I can find more reliable players is probably the more accurate thing to say about the two guys there. So, yeah, neither's been massively productive even when they have been playing a full-time role. I know that Bell had a good week last week and Clark's popped up and had a good week here or there, but neither have been consistently productive.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem. It's just hard to trust, and it's obviously this is the final week of the year, right? So you really don't want to put your season on the line in the hands of such uncertainty, right? So yeah.
Exactly. So defensive linemen are up next. John, who do you want to champion here? Who's your featured defensive lineman for week 17?
Yeah, so I guess I'll focus on a duo here and a defensive tackle duo of Kobie Turner and Aaron Donald of the Los Angeles Rams this week, going against the New York Giants interior offensive line, who every single one of them, left guard, center, right guard, rank outside of the top 100 of interior offensive linemen in pass blocking grade this season. You look at guys like Aaron Donald. I know that he's been quiet, so this is maybe another one of my bounce back guys here. Half sack in over the last 6 games, but 91.3 pass rush grade on the year, ranks second at his position. 78 total pressures, which is far and away the best mark among interior defenders, and really just a much better indicator that Aaron Donald still among the best in the league. I think he really should have a nice chance to deliver here in week 17 against Tyrod Taylor and the Giants' really poor offensive line. And the same goes with Kobie Turner, who I think is having a really nice rookie season now. 6.5 sacks on the year, 5.5 over his last 7 games alone. And then if you look at his numbers since week 12, he owns a 90.1 pass rush grade, which is the best mark for the position over that span. So that's not just among rookies, that's among all defensive interior players. So he's playing at a really high level. I think both of these guys should be able to take advantage of that matchup in the trenches this week against the Giants interior offensive line. And hopefully that leads to some sacks this week and we finish the year strong with them.
Oh, for sure. And as you said, Turner's hitting his stride at just the right time as well. If he'd been doing this just a few games earlier in the season, we'd be talking about him in contention for the defensive MVP. We wouldn't be talking about the Jalen Carters of the world. So love Turner, love Donald. Like you say, the interior of that Giants O-line. Andrew Thomas must be looking around him and thinking, just give me some help, please. Somebody step up. It must be so frustrating for him. Saquon Barkley's doing the same thing as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, Saquon's looking to go somewhere else next year, I'd imagine.
I don't blame him. So I've cheated here and gone with a pair of players for my featured DL likes. I've gone with Jonathan Cooper and Baron Browning. They're ranked as my edge 16 and edge 19 this week. Cooper's been productive, and Browning has generated a reasonable amount of pressure since he returned to the fold in week 7. But this is less about these guys and how good they are as players and more about their matchup. Justin Herbert was good at avoiding pressure, or at least the pressure that the Chargers offensive line allowed. Opposition teams converted only 15.6% of their pressures into sacks with Herbert at quarterback. Only a handful of QBs, maybe 5 or so, can claim better this year. Easton's stick is not nearly as elusive at avoiding pressure that comes his way. He ranks 3rd worst amongst all current starting quarterbacks in that category. And I think Cooper, Browning, Zach Allen will cause Stick some problems this weekend.
Yeah, I love that call. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And you're looking at guys too that they're going to lean on for a lot of snaps, right, in Denver. Because Nick Bonito, I think, is still questionable. I don't know if he's going to play or not, right? So there's really nobody else there for the edge group for Denver. So it's Jonathan Cooper and Baron Browning. I know they played like 90% plus snaps in the past already. So you look at the potential for volume there and the pass rush, like you said, it's a nice floor combined with a potential high upside as well. So I like those calls.
Good stuff. So hit me with a few more names that you like at the position.
Yeah, so a few quick hitters again. I mean, just looking at the Texans, this is a big question mark here because we don't know if Jonathon Greenard or Will Anderson is even going to play this week. But it's such a nice matchup going against Tennessee and their offensive tackles, Jalen Duncan, Dylan Radins, or Andre Dillard. Whoever ends up playing, these guys all sucked, for lack of a better word. They just have not been good. They're allowing a ton of sacks. Last time we saw Jonathon Greenard against the Titans, he had 2.5 sacks. I know he left last game though after just 3 defensive snaps with the ankle injury, so he's definitely questionable. But if he plays, I think he's a must start here against Tennessee. And the same thing with Will Anderson. It's just such a good matchup. Then really just matchup based stuff here. Again, Leonard Floyd and Greg Rousseau, another duo. So we're really focusing on the duos here, I'm noticing, for the defensive line. But going against a guy named Vidarian Lowe of the New England Patriots, Trent Brown hasn't really played full-time snaps. He didn't practice on Wednesday. So this guy could be in there. He does have the worst pass blocking grade in the entire league, 32.3. So guys like Leonard Floyd and Greg Rousseau are not like the most amazing pass rushers in the NFL, but a matchup like that with Bailey Zappi at quarterback, who, again, for all intents and purposes, is a backup quarterback. It's just, again, a nice matchup for these guys to take advantage of, and they should have the upper hand. And then the last one, looking at bounce back guys again, Myles Garrett for me is edge 1 this week. I think a lot of people are concerned about him not having recorded a sack in, I think, 4 weeks now, but continues to be the highest graded pass rusher in the entire league this season, 94.6 pass rush grade. He's going to be facing the offensive tackles of Carter Warren, who has a 48.2 pass blocking grade, which is 72nd, and Mekhi Becton, who has allowed more sacks than any other offensive tackle in the league with 11. Also, Trevor Siemian at quarterback, who, again, to his credit, been a bit better than at avoiding sacks than Zach Wilson. But Myles Garrett got to come out in a big way here in championship week, end that sackless streak, hopefully end up with more than 1 sack, and hopefully make his case for defensive player of the year, which I think, he's very deserving despite not having the sack numbers of TJ Watt this season.
I'm right there with you with Greenard and Anderson Cole. They're amongst my other DL likes. I want to start whoever plays on the edge for the Texans versus Tennessee. Tennessee, for the reasons you mentioned, have really struggled, especially at left tackle. 4.7 sacks on average they've allowed in the last 3 games. I think that ties the Chargers for the most over that period, and they've sank back into that bottom 5 of all teams in terms of sacks allowed over the course of this season, after looking a bit better after a slow start. I really want to start Greenard or Anderson, but even if they can't go, it's Derek Barnett, Jerry Hughes. Jerry Hughes must be about 50 years old now, but he's still got something left in the tank. Even last season, he still looked like a reasonably competent pass rusher. So yeah, I like any of those guys that are playing in that position. I wanted to mention Chase Young in this spot as well, because I saw that he was playing the Commanders, but the Commanders have not been as poor in pass protection of late. I was hoping to sort of trump up this idea that Chase Young going back to his old team, maybe there's a bit of extra motivation there.
I'm all for a good revenge game narrative, and I really like that one. It would have been probably better if Sam Howell was that quarterback too. It seems like he's been benched and they're going to Jacoby Brissett, right? But not that Jacoby Brissett is so elusive in any kind of way. But I'm with you. I kind of like that. I like that call there for Chase Young. I know he hasn't played necessarily the snap share that we had hoped that he would to be a reliable starter, but there's definitely going to be extra motivated here against Washington.
Who don't you like at the position for week 17, John?
Who I don't like is Kayvon Thibodeaux of the New York Giants. So this is a guy who has 11.5 sacks on the season, but he has definitely kind of outkicked his coverage here, really. Just overperforming what he's actually done on the field. He's taken advantage of some good matchups. He's had some big games, but on the season as a whole, on a play-to-play basis, has been really not good. I being kind here, 65.1 pass rush grade on the year, which is tied for 67th among edge defenders. He has a 6.5% win rate, which is 99th among edge defenders. His 40 total pressures is 45th among edge defenders. Again, it's not a great matchup going against the Rams either, whose offensive line has been hit and miss, but Matthew Stafford really has been the key here. He has the 6th best pressure to sack conversion rate in the league among quarterbacks. So I just cannot trust the player who's been that poor as far as pass rush metrics go and hope to chase his, 11 and a half sacks that he has. The metrics that we're looking at are a much more stable thing week to week than sack numbers, which we all know. But so for that reason, Kayvon Thibodeaux really just kind of like a low end edge 3 for me more than anything, and based purely on just the amount of snaps that he plays more than anything else.
He's my edge 35. I feel like I've criticized Thibodeaux as much as any other player this year, and I want to clarify for any Giants fans listening. I don't hate Thibodeaux. Right. I think he's going to become a really good edge rusher in the league. He's shown me enough to suggest that he can do that. Yeah, he's no Aiden Hutchinson. Yes, he has more sacks than Aiden Hutchinson, but I'd choose Hutchinson over Thibodeaux in a heartbeat. But anyway, so yeah, I don't hate the player. I just think he's achieved a little more this year by way of sacks, certainly, than he deserves based on how disruptive he has, or rather hasn't been, bringing pressures. Yeah, my guy, and I've kind of set myself up for a fall here. I'm gone with one of the most productive edge rushers in 2023, and I've gone with Danielle Hunter. We all know how good he has been this year. I don't need to go over his stat line for our audience, I'm sure. Unless you've got one of the 7 guys I've got ranked above him in my defensive line list, you're going to start Hunter every week. That's a given. But this Packers O-line has been performing, I think, miracles without David Bakhtiari in pass protection this year. Elton Jenkins and their 2 tackles, Zach Tom and Rasheed Walker, have been a big reason for their success. I think they've really stepped up this year. Jordan Love has been sacked only 7 times in the last 5 games, and his ability to avoid pressure during that period has been really very good. So I think there's a reasonable chance Hunter might have only, I think, his 5th game without a sack this weekend. I'm putting a target on my back, but there we go. I'm putting it out there. I like to mix it up with a couple of more difficult ones, as well as some of those easy pickings as well. And Hunter is definitely one of those ones that could make me look silly.
Well, no, I like the call because it's about tempering expectations, right? I know, like you said, he's been amazing this year. It's similar to Kayvon Thibodeaux, like the excellent production, but you just got to keep an eye on the matchups and Zach Tom, the offensive tackles there for Green Bay have done a really nice job, and Jordan Love has looked good. So I'm with you. I'm still starting Danielle Hunter, but it's not like this amazing matchup where he's locked in and as an edge 1. If you have other options that you could be potentially playing ahead of him, especially in like a 1 DL league or something like that, right? So yeah.
So are there any other players that you are fading on the defensive line this week?
So yeah, just the one other guy, and it's actually staying inside of that same game, Green Bay and Minnesota. It's Rashan Gary of the Green Bay Packers. So I have him outside of that top 24 by a decent margin this week. So definitely not somebody that's a must start by any means for me. Rashan Gary's numbers recently have been really poor as well. Like if you look at since that Thanksgiving game against the Lions, where he had 3 sacks and a 90 something pass rush grade, since that game, he has just a 51.8 pass rush grade and only a half sack since week 12. So he's going up against the Minnesota Vikings, who are the best pass blocking unit in the entire league. I know it's not Kirk Cousins back there, it's Nick Mullins, but I mean, this line has just done an excellent job at pass blocking. And then the numbers are definitely concerning here for Rashan Gary. So he's my kind of one fade. I only had the one dislike this week along the defensive line.
I hate to admit it, but yeah, you're right. He's not been nearly as good or nearly as efficient as he was at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I still really like Rashan Gary for like dynasty purposes. I think there's a lot of potential there, and it could be just one of those things coming off the injury as well, and starting to wear on him a little bit. So hopefully he gets healthy in the offseason and he could get back to it, because I like him as a player, but looking at the current sample size, don't like what I'm seeing, and I don't like the matchup.
So for me, Yaya Diaby is a player that I am just pumping the brakes on a little bit. He deserves all the credit that he's getting after putting up, eight sacks this year. That's pretty impressive for a rookie. I'm not trying to spoil the Diaby sort of coming out party. But I do think he's been a bit fortunate to record so many sacks after creating only 22 pressures. And the Saints, they just have not been in the habit of allowing many sacks this season, especially in the last 3 games. So again, as I did with Thibodeaux, I want to caveat this by saying I do think Diaby has a bright future, and I do like the fact that he's stolen snaps from Tryon Shoyinka, who has been a massive disappointment. But I just don't think this is Diaby's week. And the second guy is Sam Hubbard. And he's had a down year in general. He's missed a couple of games, which haven't really helped. But even when he's been healthy, his snap share is not quite where it was in 2022. And he hasn't been as effective on a per snap basis. His tackle numbers are still good for an edge rusher, as they so often have been in the past. But his pressure rate, which was never stellar, he's always been that sort of the opposite to Trey Hendrickson in that sense. Good tackle numbers, not the best pass rusher, but even his pressure numbers this year, Hubbard's have actually gone down again, dipped below 10%, and that's a big red flag to me, especially in a tough matchup with the Chiefs.
Yeah, not easy to get sacks on Patrick Mahomes, and especially if you got a 58.4 pass rush grade on the year. That's never been his strength, like you said. It's just he's not the best pass rusher, and if the tackles aren't there for him, he's just a volume guy that you hope falls into some production, and you're not going to bank on that against Kansas City. He just hasn't been good enough this year, so I'm with you.
So swiftly on to defensive backs, famously difficult to predict what they'll do, but I know you're up to the job, John, even if I am not. Who are you recommending people start this week?
Yeah, so I think I'll make things extra difficult on myself and go with a cornerback as the highlighted player this week, and that is Mike Hilton of the Cincinnati Bengals. So just, again, staying in that same game, Cincinnati and Kansas City. I love Mike Hilton as a player. I think he's one of the best slot corners in the league, and he's been a really solid IDP this year, but he also gets a really nice matchup this week against Kansas City, who are giving up 14.4 tackles per game to the cornerback position this year, which is the 4th best mark. We just saw Nate Hobbs, another slot corner, come off an 11 tackle game against the Chiefs this past week. Nate Hobbs, definitely a guy that plays a little bit more snaps than Mike Hilton. Mike Hilton averaging 81% of the defensive snaps on the year, but Mike Hilton has always been efficient with his opportunities, especially this season. So really like him in a great matchup here against Kansas City, and especially playing in that slot role against Patrick Mahomes' Chiefs. So yeah, Mike Hilton is one of the top cornerbacks for me for IDP this week.
Yeah, good shout. I like Hilton. I was a bit slow on the uptake actually, where Hilton's concerned, to appreciate how good he was as a fantasy option. Always knew him as a decent corner, but it wasn't until it was either you or Tom Kislingberry came on, kind of opened my eyes a little bit to how useful Hilton could be in a fantasy sense as well as on the NFL field. So yeah, I appreciate that shout. My featured like at the DB spot is Justin Reid. I've stayed safe with a safety, so he's my DB 14 this week, and I may move him higher after looking at him in a little more detail. He's got his flaws. He hasn't been as good in pass coverage as he was last year, and certainly not as good as he was in his first couple of seasons with the Texans. He did allow a touchdown in 3 straight games between weeks 12 and 14, but he's played better in the 2 games since. The Chiefs are playing against the Bengals this weekend, and the Bengals have been an average matchup for opposition safeties this year, but that again has improved with Jake Browning at quarterback, and Justin Reid has the 2nd most tackles among all safeties over the course of the last month. I'd feel more comfortable nominating him if he was producing big plays at a higher clip, but I chase flaws at the DB position, and I think that's what Reid has provided for us this season, and especially so in the last month. John, what other DBs do you want to hype this week?
Yeah, so just a few other guys that I'm happy to put into lineups this week and looking forward to their potential for production. Looking at Budda Baker of the Arizona Cardinals going against the Philadelphia Eagles this week. Eagles giving up the fourth most tackles per game to the safety position. Budda Baker, he's been among the top 10 at the safety position as far as tackle efficiency goes this season. So he's been excellent. Love him. PJ Locke is another one of the Denver Broncos. So there definitely been some concern heading into last week of Kareem Jackson's suspension ending and coming back into the lineup. But the team basically solidified their trust in PJ Locke by releasing Kareem Jackson and waiving him. He was picked up by the Texans, but PJ Locke looks locked in to start this week again, and definitely somebody that we could comfortably start in IDP lineups. Facing the Chargers, not the best matchup, but PJ Locke has been so productive, so I really like him this week. And the last one on the list was just Nick Cross. Again, for deeper leagues, Nick Cross of the Indianapolis Colts. Unfortunately, Julian Blackmon was placed on injured reserve, but had been so productive, so consistent all year long, playing that box-heavy role in Gus Bradley's defense. That role should go to Nick Cross now. We don't know how efficient he's going to be, or it not being a great matchup against the Raiders. But Nick Cross, if you're looking for somebody as a streamer who should get ideal usage for IDP purposes, I think Nick Cross could be a solid option in deeper leagues as well.
Yeah, nice list. And yeah, it's nice to see PJ Locke get rewarded with that continuing starting role. So long may his production continue. I've gone with another pair of guys here. So the Patriots safeties, essentially. So Kyle Duggar and Jabril Peppers. Obviously, Peppers a little bit banged up. Got to keep an eye on him. But yeah, neither player's really lit it up this year. Duggar's been the more productive in terms of the tackle volume. But I don't have either guy, I don't think, ranked inside of my top 20. They're both just outside. But yeah, Duggar, you could make a case for him being in that sort of the high end safety 2 category. So the Bills, they're playing this weekend. They've allowed the highest tackle efficiency to opposition safeties this year. So yeah, I'm firing up those Patriots safeties.
Yeah, I love Kyle Duggar. He's definitely high in the ranks for me. He's one of my favorite players, so I always rank him a little bit higher. And I just love the usage there, and especially now that he's getting 100% of snaps this season, has just been all systems go for me to put him in lineups and be happy with what he can give me.
Nice. So on to the last section, John. DBs we are fading for week 17. Who is your featured player?
Yeah, so I'll start with Jalen Pitre of the Houston Texans. So just concerned here about the potential for him playing the entire game, right? Because he was benched in the second half of last game, near the end of the third quarter, didn't play at all beyond the third quarter. That for me is just a big red flag, right? If DeMeco Ryans is willing to bench his starters, even if he comes back and plays and starts this week, there's always that potential now that poor play can lead to a benching. And Jalen Pitre didn't grade highly last year, hasn't been amazing this year. He hasn't been an amazing IDP either. Also not a great matchup against the Tennessee Titans this week, who I don't have it written down here, but I believe they're giving up the second fewest tackles per game to the safety position as well. So there's just so many red flags for Jalen Pitre for me that I'm keeping him far away from starting lineups in such a big week.
Snap. He's my guy. I'm not surprised that we're in sync on this one. And that we're mentioning the same player, because he was such a high profile safety, wasn't he? He was maybe one of the top, I'd say top 10, top 12 safeties drafted this year, and maybe more. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he started slowly, found his feet for a handful of games, and then dropped off again. Ultimately, poor performances, got benched. Kareem Jackson's now involved. I'm, struggling to put my finger on what happened with Pitre. 13% tackle rate last year, 5 interceptions, only an 8.9% tackle rate this year, and 0 interceptions. So I'm out on him. I don't like what I'm seeing. Can't put my finger on the reason for his decline, but it's a hard pass from me on him this week.
Yeah, we'll maybe look at it more in the offseason. But yeah, like you said, right now, just been a regular average Joe safety, despite the top 5 safety draft capital that people were spending on him. And the benching just makes it all the more reason to avoid him this week.
Yeah. So can you give me any more names at the DB spot who you're fading this week?
Yeah, so the other guy that I put on the list here, I really this is a big one for me. It hurts my heart, but I am a little bit concerned about Derwin James this week. I moved him down the rankings a bit just because we saw a pretty significant shift in usage. He worked as the team's like primary nickel or slot corner, and did come off the field for a handful of snaps throughout the course of the game as well. So I don't know if that's necessarily going to be something that continues here into week 17, but it was at least concerning enough that the coaching staff would do this without Brandon Staley at the helm, right? So they're obviously experimenting a little bit here to see what works. And as much as it doesn't make sense to me, it is at least concerning for IDP purposes that he might not play an every down role. And with that, he just comes down the rankings just a little bit. So no longer, I guess, the locked in safety one for me this week. And it's not something that I'm concerned about long term. We talked about this on the podcast we just recorded, but it is at least concerning for me for week 17 in a league where there's 100% snap safeties. I mean, it makes it a little bit riskier for Derwin James, despite how efficient he's been as a tackler, but still in a startable range for me, just not inside that top 10 really for me this week.
Yeah. But also, how dare you, John? You should take down that Derwin James picture from behind you on the wall. You're not deserving.
It sucks. Especially with this being basically the last player that I'm going to focus on for the entire season. This is just the story of my year. Make it just more miserable. But yeah, that's what it is.
No, it's a fair call. Your hand has been forced really to make that call at this point in the season. Again, Fantasy Championship can't take any risks here. Certainly not on the idea that a player might not play 100% of snaps at the DB spot, right? I am not keen on Xavier Woods. He had a solid game last week with 7 solo tackles, but I think it's a bit of a trap. He's had only an 8% tackle efficiency this year, averaging 4.5 tackles per game. And the Jags are bottom 5 among teams in terms of tackles allowed to opposition safeties. My last guy is Tyrann Mathieu. And I hate choosing him here because I like him as a player, and I always have. He had a really good game against the Rams last weekend, but I don't trust him on a weekly basis. He's had 3 or fewer solo tackles in 73% of his games this year. And he's playing against the Bucs this weekend, who typically don't allow a ton of tackles to opposition safeties. So, John, we're done. And as your reward, you now get to go off and polish off the Christmas leftovers. Safe in the knowledge that you've helped our audience achieve success in their fantasy championship this weekend.
I hope so.
It's been great having you on, dude. Thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Where can our listeners and viewers find more of your expert fantasy takes and advice?
Yeah, well, no, thank you for having me on, and I'm obviously always happy to talk with you. So I appreciate you having me on here, and like I said, hopefully help people get those fantasy championships secured this weekend. But yeah, you can find all my work on PFF.com. We'll have everything up there that I write, IDP rankings, IDP fantasy report, which is delayed this week. Sadly, it should be coming out Thursday. Just the Christmas schedule and editor schedules got created a backlog, so I do apologize for people that were looking for that, but it will be out on Thursday. Thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure. You're a star. I am on X at Jase Abbey, and as always, my rankings are on the IDPshow.com. And for those who are playing fantasy all the way through the regular season, I'll be back for the season finale of this ranking show next week for week 18. Thanks for listening. Good luck to those competing in the big game this weekend. And until next time.